product life stage is principle number 2. What do we mean by life stage? So life stage meaning, and there's a lot of different ways that people classify these, but effectively, you're developing something, you're launching some minimal version of it, then you're growing and scaling it. At some point it matures, and then there's decline and death. And why does this matter? Well, it matters because these strategy and tactics that you use at different stages are quite different. So if you think you're in maturity and saturation and you're employing techniques from development, it can be horribly inefficient. And it can basically, you can kind of alter your trajectory in very suboptimal ways if you're not cognizant of basically where you are here. And especially as you're kind of a big growing company, I think it can be very helpful to articulate this, not just kind of for you as a team, but also for the other teams that are working with you, for senior management as well. For example, if you're very early in development stage, maybe you want like a little more breathing room for management as you kind of try some crazy things, just because it's early, you're kind of in R&D stage. And so it's helpful to know where you are and to be clear about that and to articulate that such that you stand a better chance of kind of effectively getting to the next stage. So how do we do this? Well, I'd say as a short form at Nubank, it's not that maturity and decline don't necessarily apply to us. And we could have this discussion, especially if we had a little bit more time. But I think as a kind of a sort of a shorthand, most of the time it's easiest just to classify, like, are we in like pre-PMF phase, pre-product market fit, or are we at product market fit and we're scaling? I think most of the products that you'll see at Nubank would be in one of those two categories. And so if there's one kind of takeaway from this section that I would have, it would be, learn to sort of identify those two and some of the techniques you might use if you're in one versus the other. And that, that's probably going to apply to most of you that are here today. So pre-product market fit is really essentially kind of when you're still kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall, so to speak. You're still crafting your product. You're maybe not totally sure of maybe the use case that you're kind of working on, or maybe even the unmet need that you're trying to address. And so you're still in R&D phase, and you're trying out a few different things. And one of the metrics that we love to look at when we're in this phase is this Sean Ellis survey, which is basically, how would you feel if Nubank could no longer offer you this, quote unquote, early stage product? And when those scores are quite low, it's usually a sort of a sign that we haven't quite found something that's interesting or compelling enough for customers, and therefore sort of for us to kind of maybe further invest in and try to scale. And when those scores get much higher, it gives us a little bit of an indication that maybe we're on our way. Another interesting kind of framework to think about, which I'm sure everybody here has heard of, is the concept of an MVP, but sort of how you craft that MVP. Because sometimes I think people will think of an MVP as, a certain product needs X, Y, and Z to be functional. And the kind of that's what we'll deliver. So like, as long as, the flow in the app works and like it's stable, then we can ship it. But what we would, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, what we would sort of push teams on today is, maybe that's not quite the right way to think about it. It's not kind of, will it work, but it's sort of, will it land? Will customers like it? Will it be compelling enough? And there might even be ways to craft an MVP where you can maybe even ignore a certain piece of the product and invest a little bit more in making another piece of it kind of really interesting and compelling. And then if you see that lands, then you can start to kind of fill out sort of more of the product suite. So I'll talk a little bit more about this in 1 second. And then that's kind of pre-product market fit. When you get into more product market fit range, that's when it starts to look a little bit more like what I would call kind of business as usual at Nubank, which is you're growing the product, you have your prioritization framework, you're looking at all the various investments that you can make. You can invest in new features, you can invest in performance, you can invest in productivity of your team, and you're making those trade-offs based on what drives your KRs or your North Star metrics. And to some extent, I'm not saying that's simple, but it's a little bit more straightforward than some of the trade-offs you're often making when you're in research and development phase. So just a little bit on MVPs and MLPs. I think MVPs often get construed a little bit more like the left, which is, what do you need to actually get the product out the door? And the downside of this is you can end up kind of investing a lot in something that customers might ultimately not, really respond to. And the problem is you won't really know why. Like, they might not respond to it because you're just kind of, you misunderstood the unmet need. You're just kind of investing in the wrong job to be done, whatever. Or they might not be responding to it because all you're doing is the bare minimum here, and you're not really kind of creating any kind of an emotional attachment to the customer. So on the right side, which you can call MLP, or you can call sort of, you can redefine sort of what V means, but it's another way to think about this, which is finding a way to test your hypothesis, finding a way to get a product out there where you're actually forming that connection with customers without investing in kind of the full range of the product to see if it really connects. And if it does, you can always add on sort of more of the base of that pyramid. And there's multiple ways of showing this. For example, this might be another one, which is, take a very narrow view of a specific use case and just make that really, really awesome, as opposed to trying to have a functional product for a couple of use cases. First principles thinking. So why do this? Well, Nubank is all about being bold, avoiding the conventional wisdom, challenging the status quo. If you boil things down to first principles, that's a great way to get out of conventional wisdom. It's a great way to get out of incrementality. And helps us basically challenge the status quo and synthesize a new way. The way that we do this, kind of classic PM canon, 5 whys, really trying to understand what's sitting beneath every single assumption, looking for evidence, and then trying to be able to not only consider alternatives, but also consider alternatives and their consequences, even argue the alternate point of view, so that you can strengthen your own reasoning. But what I thought would be kind of fun is to maybe try to get inside of David's head about 9 years ago, and you can see how the same thing applies. A free credit card, especially one with great service, tended to be viewed as basically impossible to do unless you were a big bank, and the big banks even weren't offering the free part or the great service part. But as you dig into it in 2013, it actually starts to seem less crazy. The cost of risk was supposedly very, very high. But by 2013, a lot of the bureaus had APIs. The credit models of the banks actually were not that sophisticated. There was a lot of new sources of data from cell phones, you name it. So the cost of risk wasn't as high as maybe it was back in the 90s. Cost of funding also seemed super high, but venture capital was starting to come into the region. The D+30 sort of settlement period made it so that float actually wasn't a major factor. And so, this one I think did require a Sequoia, for example, but not perhaps as crazy as it might have seemed 20 years ago as well. Cost of acquisition, obviously the assumption that only large banks could afford any marketing, hire agents, sheets, branches, etc. And you needed the anuidade, you needed the annual fees as well. But as we saw, with people doing things on their phones, with the rise of online marketing, with the ability of a company such as ours to create more of a viral sort of MGM, cost of acquisition came way down. And then finally, on cost of operating the business, again, assumption that only large banks could do this, could have servers, could have branches, etc. But with AWS, mobile phones, a lot of the changes that are happening in the environment, again, this when you really took a closer look at it, did not seem as as insane as it would have been 20 years earlier. So, you continue asking why across all the various, and this is just the cost, right? And all of a sudden, maybe a free credit card does not seem as crazy as one might think. And so, the power of first principles thinking to get outside of conventional wisdom, to rethink, a lot of long held assumptions in industries like financial services, and industries like space exploration, really has a lot of power. And I think it ties very directly to our value around challenging the status quo.